In this lesson, you'll learn about focus points and autofocus modes. This allows you to change where in your frame and how the camera automatically focuses. Focus points are little points in your frame that the camera uses to choose what's in focus. Some cameras have lots of points, with the best professional cameras having over 100, while more entry-level cameras have between 5 to 20. More usually means your camera will be better at autofocusing, but it doesn't mean you can't get perfectly sharp images with a cheaper camera. With most DSLR and mirrorless cameras, when using autofocus mode, you press on the shutter halfway, you'll hear a beep, and some autofocus points will light up on your screen. It's really looking for contrasting lines. By default, the camera is using all those points at the same time. Each point is trying to find something in focus, and usually the first point to find something wins, and the camera will focus on that specific point. This is why sometimes, even if you're framing up your subject and using autofocus, it will focus on the background. Most cameras allow you to change which focus points are being used. What this is called is different on most models and brands, so we can't explain everything in this lesson, and this would be a great time to crack open that dusty manual you got when purchasing your camera. In general, there may be a mode where you can select the center point. That way, the camera will focus on whatever is in the middle of your frame. Other times, you can choose different zones like the left or the right side of the frame, or even be able to move the zone exactly to where you want it to be. For example, if you're shooting a lot of photos using the rule of thirds and your subject is always on the right side, you may want to choose on autofocus mode where the camera is always focusing on that side. Some cameras even have face detection now, where it will automatically try to focus on any faces in the frame. You can see this sometimes with a yellow box around certain faces. Remember though, these options aren't available for all cameras, so do a quick Google search to see what options your camera has specifically.
Different cameras will be different, but in this camera I want to show you how the autofocus points work. So I'm going to switch back to autofocus, and you should see on the screen now different little squares show up. Right now it's using all of these different squares to try to find focus. And so the first one that finds focus is going to be the one that focuses on your subject. But I can manually adjust that, and you're gonna have to find the setting on your camera, but I basically press a button, and with the up, down, or left, right buttons, I can move it to a specific point. So I'm gonna go over to the very rightmost point to show you what happens now. Still on autofocus, what happens? Now it's pulling focus on the background where that point was. Say I pan over just a little bit though now, that point is hovering over our subject. So now I'm gonna take that photo, and you should see that our subject, which is now on the right side of the frame, is in focus. So with this camera in this mode, I can pick any of those squares to use for autofocus. We can also go into the menu and choose an autofocus mode. This camera has face tracking. So if I enable that, now you see a little square around our subject's face. And even if I'm panning left to right, it tries to track the face. And that's pretty good, even though this is just a statue. This camera also has a couple modes: Flexi Zone Multiple, Flexi Zone Single. So if I do the Flexi Zone Single, now I can move this specific square around to any part of the frame that I want. And it's actually trying to autofocus as I do that. And finally, it gets in focus. It's a little bit dark, but you can see that I can move this wherever I want. So that's just a quick demonstration of some of the options you might have for autofocus modes. So check out your camera and see which ones you have.
So that's autofocus points. What about autofocus modes? Again, this will be different for different cameras, but usually there's an option where your camera will always be searching and changing focus when pressing halfway down on the shutter button. This mode is helpful when tracking objects moving towards you or away from you, like a car racing towards you under a bridge or someone running down a soccer field. Or there's an option that allows you to lock focus upon half pressing the shutter button, so that if you reframe, the focus will stay the same. Some cameras, you can change the buttons on the back to be that button as well if you don't want it to be your shutter button. I personally leave my camera on the one-shot mode most of the time, unless I'm in a situation where I know I'll be tracking moving objects, kids running around, stuff like that. Depending on what you're shooting, try out the different modes and play around with your points of focus. It really is about how you work with your specific camera.